Casual reading for The Breaking and Binding of Souls by Joe King for family and friends. For Rena Lesue, who started, guided, and unwittingly challenged me to write. Consider this extra credit. I find myself in need of thanking my champion of a literary development agent and my patient and positive publishing coordinator. Further still, I'd like to thank my athlete of an editor who's probably spent just as much time on this book as I have. All their work is displayed behind the dramatically arranged and eye-catching cover. I'm proud to have them as my team on this project, and it's been a privilege to work with Page Publishing in our efforts to produce this novel. My mind drifts back to my friends and teachers who supported me as I wrote, the most prominent being the guiding creative writing teacher, Rena Lesue. She gave me some much-needed feedback and introduced me to the world of publishing. Beyond that, I must thank my family for being wonderful as always as they encouraged and supported me. This novel wouldn't have been possible without these people. Cover art, Page Publishing team. In-book art, Amberly Cox Hales, Michael Bean, Spencer Hales, Michaela Hales Bean. Prologue, Tainted. Delia mumbled the words of the blessing her mother had taught her. Sight before me to see what sleeps beneath. Someone yelled in the street. The cry lasting long into the night, vivid and full of pain until the scream was cut off abruptly. That had sounded like Vra, the city's seamstress. How could such a careful voice produce such a shrill scream? To see what sleeps beneath, may I hold protection like unto his wreath. Swift is his power, as is the sword of holiness from his black sheath, Delia recited. Her mother had always memorized scripture and had subsequently demanded that Delia do the same. It had been a comfortable time in the evening with just them, although Delia didn't know where they had gone, not after the fire had taken their home. The night fell silent. Without the sounds, the air seemed to be empty, dead itself, although she could hear wood shift and fall as the fire destabilized structures. The herald of proclamation had said this was to happen, that they had been changed, tainted. Her family, she, had been tainted. She didn't feel any different. That made them all heretics, all traitors to God himself. Then the chapter had come, headed by the leader of the archpriestess of District 7. Tarb had stood before the impressive line of armored soldiers, a fire poker upright in his wide fists. Others had joined him, and even though they held actual weapons, they fell just as fast. Soldiers rushed past, followed by an archpriestess. She had the attire that spoke to more knights on a battlefield than in a temple. Gold glittered on the hem of her hood and cloak, completely hiding her face, all but her eyes, silver and as bright as the stars themselves. Under the white cloak, Delia could see the glimmer of steel or some other metal. She couldn't see the delicate weavings in the plate, so she didn't think that it must have been surprising. She could see the delicate weavings in the plate, so she didn't think that it must have been surprisingly strong. Delia scrambled back further into the soot-covered alleyway. Maybe if she could hide well enough, find her family, or perhaps even Dern the blacksmith. Delia froze, unable to move. Fire wavered as it consumed another building, garish from out of the corner of her eyes. It seems you missed one, Captain. You embarrass your chapter right over there, behind some rubbish, the archpriestess said as she made a gesture towards Delia. And please, for the sake of his holiness above, make it quick. Soldiers hustled towards Delia, their armor cacophonous as it slid against one another. A small group of 3 or so clacked against one another. Swords that normally shone brightly now glinted a darker color. Soot darkened their white clothing. They looked less like soldiers and more like shadow-form creatures of old. Delia looked from the soldier to her body, shifting her weight from side to side in an effort to try and break out of whatever it was that held her down. It wasn't like her limbs were numb, but some force applied in just the right way to prohibit enough motion to generate enough momentum to escape. Leaving Delia's body in a bent half crouch with her face looking over her shoulder, the soldiers all but flung themselves into the valley, armor screeching as it scratched along the brick-laid walls. White ash with smoldering edges flew past her in flurries. The smell of smoke was thick in her nose as it stung her eyes. Her eyes moved about frantically, from soldiers to her immobile body, to the archpriestess who still stared at her with those piercing, unmoving eyes, cold and cruel, eyes from an almost impassive face, almost indifferent. Delia flinched as the nearest soldier, only a mere foot from her, he raised his sword, his arms holding it high above his helmeted head. She heard a rush of air, and the edge of the sword's blade bit into her shoulder. The steel was cold, but the wound made it feel as if it were red hot. She whimpered, then hesitated. She was surely dead, but she could no longer feel the edge of the sword on her arm. Then the priestess's eyes went wide. The soldier grunted as his form crumpled to the stone before her, a mess of metal and a mangled human form. The archpriestess swore. The two remaining soldiers held their ground but didn't approach her. Disbelief was alive on their worn faces. She stood up. She felt warm. She felt good. Delia started. She was standing. She wasn't held in place anymore. Delia experimentally flexed her muscles, and the breath she had been holding in escaped into the midnight air. She felt stronger than before. It didn't seem to her that she'd gained any actual muscle mass, but she felt like she could run forever. Delia pulled her head back, looking at her shoulder. Her eyes widened as she found it healed, with no torn flesh. She breathed in again, noting how the smoke didn't stifle her nose. Delia breathed out as a cold focus settled over her. She looked up, thanking Bonsmodes for responding to her prayer. Then, as she looked back down towards the soldiers and archpriestess, she felt the rage settle upon her. The rage of having her city burned and torn down, the rage of losing Pero and the two Dandin sisters, the rage of being helpless to stop any of it. She stepped forward and easily dodged a swipe as one of the soldiers aimed for her neck. She kicked him directly in the knee, hoping to throw him off balance. He flew out of the alley and hit the archpriestess. The last soldier yelled and tried to run her through. With leisure, she swatted the blade away and lightly pushed against his chest plate. It deformed, and his form skidded along the stone street. She had quickly registered how quickly her body moved, how strong it was. Still, though, she didn't feel regret when she saw the soldiers crumble. The mess of entangled bodies shifted, and the archpriestess threw off the burdensome weight of the soldier. Abomination! This wasn't supposed to happen yet. You solidified your resolve to the pit with your first action being the killing of my men. Bonsmodes be willing, I'll sever your connection to Demetrius as I sever your soul from your tainted, defiled body. Something struck Delia. Not enough to toss her in the air, but enough to make her lose balance. The air sizzled around her, steam rolling off the sides of the alley. Her skin felt irritated, slightly burned. Delia cradled a hand to her head as she felt dizzy and disoriented. Her ears rang with a small but sharp sound, making it hard to think. The archpriestess looked furious, twin knives gleaming in both of her hands. Delia growled. She felt energy coil itself over her muscles, itching to be used. Delia moved first, planting her heels down on the ground and then jumping towards the archpriestess. Delia felt the rush of air and her own voice in a low growl. The archpriestess leaned to the side, a knife held out as it cut Delia's side. Delia clamped her jaw at the pain, even though she knew that the wound would be more painful than it should be more painful than it was. She stopped, skidding on the stones that made up the road, and pressed a warm hand to her side. It came away with a small smear of blood. Delia set her jaw and came closer to the archpriestess. If this fight was to be won, it would be done using her abilities. Her abilities and a gamble. She felt her muscles tighten. They wanted to be used. Her muscles wanted to be flexed and pumped. The priestess, on the other hand, looked uncertain, reserved in her movement, as if she didn't know what to expect from Delia. Although those knives in her hands gleamed dangerously with the reflected light from the fire. If Delia didn't do something reckless, she'd slowly be cut to pieces. Delia didn't lie to herself. She would not beat this woman. No, her only hope was to decommission her long enough for her to get away. Delia jumped to her right, barely avoiding another surge of crackling energy. Her forearms still felt uncomfortably hot. She needed to end this before she sustained any long-lasting damage. Delia pounced, a blur as she traveled through the air. The priestess shifted herself off to the left. Looking unstable, she had lost her footing. This was her chance. She landed on the ground and turned her body to the left, using the momentum from the jump to add to her speed. She didn't have any weapons, so she'd have to get close enough to punch her. She collided with the priestess in a rush of wind and a blur of motion. Both of them crashed to the ground. Delia gasped. She slipped a hand over her side. Her fingers met a sharp metallic object with a small handle, a dagger, cold and sharp, sticking in her side. She'd been stabbed. The priestess smiled. Delia gasped as the archpriestess turned the knife inside of her. "You are dumb as you are foul. Burn in—" With a hand pressed to the priestess's jaw, Delia shunted the priestess away from her, her hand held tightly over the gash on her side. Delia heard the body crash to the stones, the metallic chink of the armor as it hit the road. But she didn't pay her any heed, though, the dizziness returning as her side grew in pain. She stumbled into some rubble, a hiss of air feeding some newfound flames as more ash broke into the wind. The priestess must have stabbed her when she had hit her. But how did she really have it ready to stab her? Delia's assault was far too fast for the stumble. It was a facade. She made herself look like she had lost her footing so Delia would get close enough to be within reach of her dagger. Cunning. Delia let out a noise as the pain suddenly surged through her body. It felt like it was on fire. Delia tried to think as her mind became murky with agony, her body seeming to be resistant to all the other attacks, but something was strange even about that knife. She mentally steeled herself. It doesn't matter how you got stabbed. It only matters how you are going to manage to survive, she thought. Anam, the city healer, wasn't here to help her. He had died, just like everyone else in Hebrita, so no use in looking for them. Delia didn't want to recognize any of the remains. Her home burned and scourged, and the friendly, hard-working people who also called it home had died. Delia tore some cloth from the lethargic debris. She wrapped it around her midriff tight to hold the wound and make sure it was closed. She cinched the knot, pulling outward with her hands. While Anam might have given her some critiques on the wrap, it would have to do for now. He'd always done his duty for free because Delia's mother had been his assistant, the town nurse. She looked around herself. The city was silently burning. No fire, but smoldering wreckage that wept weak smoke into the night sky. She needed to get out of here, surely. Soldiers would come back to check. The archpriestess would surely wake up from her collision. There was nothing more she could do here, nothing left for her here. She needed to survive. She just found herself the target of the Imperium's full and focused might. Chapter 1, Priestess. And they shall toil with people and places as a shepherd of perfection gathering and guarding those who walk unto and call for protection. Envant Baudet's 100th couplet, in Time of Promise, page 105. Something shook Dysandra. She moaned, the sound resonating deep in her throat. Her body hurt. She took a deep breath and immediately winced. A few broken ribs, an inconvenience. She placed her hand at the angle of her jaw and pushed, popping it back into place. Her head felt stuffy, a dull but large pounding rain sounding from the base of her skull. A dull but large pounding pain sounding from the base of her skull. Her neck sparked with fire whenever she shifted too quickly. She breathed out, more annoyed than agonized. She'd heal them soon, but settled for a simple simulacrum that took away most of the pain. Something shook her once more, hands moving along her shoulders. Dysandra felt ashamed at how the battle had gone. If Gid had been nearby, the older man would have pointed out that she had underestimated the capabilities of her enemy. "Hey, wake up! Something terrible has happened. Please just wake up!" Dysandra's eyes shot open, her eyes greeted with the familiar sight of the demolished city. She shot up, slowly, so as not to inflame her broken ribs. Just because it was an inconvenience didn't mean it had to be worse. A boy sat next to her, little more than a child. He had fear in his small, innocent eyes. "Please, can you just stay here? Everybody I know is gone. I can't find them." "Hush, hush," she said softly to him. "Yes, you may. I'd love for you to stay here with me. What do they call you, little one?" My name is Tal. What's yours?" he said half-excitedly. "I am Dysandra, High Archpriestess, leader of the Deodu Monastery, sister of the Silent Lips, and favored fist of the Almighty." "Nice to meet you, Tal," she said in a cool voice. "Wow, that all sounds important and all. Can you tell me why the soldiers burned my house down? My mother was talking about a herald or something, but I was playing. Where is my mother? Do you know where she is? Do you know where my sister is?" Understanding blossomed on her face. This little boy that sat beside her was a heretic. She was tasked with killing them. The taint, a thing like a virus, had begun to fester in the world, but then again, an idea sprang to life in her mind. "You know what, Tal? I'm going back home. I would love for you to come with me. Maybe back home we can find out why all this happened. Would you like that, Tal?" He tilted his head in thought. He briefly looked back toward what remained of his city and home. Then he turned back to her with wide eyes. He nodded emphatically and instantly reached to hold her hand. Dysandra let the child take her hand. His hand was soft and warm compared to her own. She gave a comforting squeeze to the little boy and smiled at him. "Well now, little one, we have to get going now. It's a long journey. Stay close," she said as she stood. The little boy clung close to her, never letting go of her hand. Dysandra looked behind her even though she knew she wouldn't be able to see her monastery or the accompanying city. This had been the last establishment that had the taint in her district. From here, she and her chapter would travel south towards the capital city of her district. From here, she and her chapter would travel south toward the capital city of her district. Nearby, a resident force had blocked what looked to be the entire first story of their building. Dysandra smiled as her soldiers raised shields above their heads, allowing some soldiers to walk or run up the improvised slope and jump into the windows. She stood herself up, her armor clinking as her legs and torso shifted. Tal walked closer, hands outstretched to help her, but she held out her palm to the boy, waving him aside. She moved her head from side to side, a hand rubbing the back of her neck. Even with the simulacrum, she had felt a dart of pain. She stood up to her full height. More so, the armor not only protected the body, but added to her stature, making her taller and more imposing, imperious and strong. She let the boy grasp her hand again for fear of losing him as she walked among the smoldering buildings. It seems that her helm had been knocked free. A quick look around, and a few moments later had the helm between her side, held in place by her arm. The city drew her eye again. Roofs had fallen in, fences mere blackened sticks. Dysandra spared a glance down at the boy, noting his fear and something else in his eyes as he took in what remained of his city. Was it loss or shock? Dysandra glanced back up, gazing at a large group of soldiers that had approached. The group had finished their grievous task, and following protocol had reassembled in their ranks. Back straight, eyes level, she smiled as she saw the Imperium standard raised, a screeching eagle, talons perched on the hilt of a sword. She walked briskly to the head of the force of 500 armored men, clutching Tal's hand firmer as she passed them. When she stopped, Lieutenant Liu immediately stalked up to her, saluting. "We've completed your order. This portion of the city has been taken. We sustained only a few casualties, more than we had originally projected, but not a limiting amount by any means. Do you have any new orders for us, Archpriestess?" Dysandra shifted her eyes down to the boy, trying to gauge his reaction, then flipped them back up to address the lieutenant. "That's good to hear. Have you heard the news from Captain Avram or any of the other forces?" Lou nodded. "Yes, we received a missive from him. He's taken his territory and has divided his force to expedite the progress of Lieutenants Lanker and Aran. From what I gather, the only thing we can do is wait for our forces to rejoin and march back." Dysandra nodded, eyes looking at the far end of the city, firelight dancing in the cityscape reflected in her gray eyes. Lou coughed. Dysandra narrowed her eyes as she rounded on him. "Is something the matter?" "The boy, Your Holiness? In the briefing you had told us that—" His eyes roved from Tal to her again. "That we pacify the locals. Has something changed?" Dysandra peered at him, narrowing her eyes as the rest of her face remained unconcerned. "I have my reasons, but I am curious. Are you questioning your Archpriestess?" Lou stepped back but kept his eyes and head level. "No, of course not, Holiness." Dysandra pointed her chin out slightly. "All is well. Send a scout to notify the captain and lieutenants that they are to search the city and the surrounding areas for escaped persons. If any are found, I will be notified first and with speed. After the search, we will start our journey back home." Lou simply nodded and waved over a boy with a light leather armor, pointing to the other side of the city, his other hand on the lad's shoulder. Dysandra bristled as she moved towards the convoy, the boy at her side. She had to be intentionally vague about her motivations to not raise the boy's suspicions. Even if he was young, she would take time to personally hunt down the younger woman who had attacked her before. The only problem was that she now toted something potentially more valuable. The boy would provide the Imperium with an avenue that they could utilize in this terrible crusade against Demetrius. His taint had been foretold by the Awakened, and Dysandra would sooner die than see her district turn into demons. But if they had managed to gather information on it, it may have aided them in battling or even preventing new demons, even if that meant lying to the one by her side. The sound of the convoy was mind-numbing. The sound was constant, incessant during their month-long pilgrimage from Upricha. The wheels rolling over the plateau provided Dysandra no favor with the long trek back to the capital city. District 7, her district, ran along the border of the Imperium and the wilderness of Philidae. There had been talk about extending the border, as native tribes would be easy to battle for the Imperium to win, but the foliage had just been so dense. With the territorial fauna, as well as the dangerous flora, had proven to be perilous. On either side of District 7 were District 6 and District 3. It had been good that the Herald of Proclamation had taken his own security on a separate course. Always careful that one was. Tall retracted his head from the window, a quizzical look painted on his little face. Hey, what are the big cat things? They pull the convoy. They look tired. Do they need a break? Dysandra sighed. Those are royal felly, but I assure you they are far from tired, little one. They are bred to journey across large swaths of land. Their strength is what allows us to travel swiftly. Of course, horses carry everything else besides the two who tow this carriage, but don't get close to them, Tall. They are still beasts, wild. Only the Beastmaster and a few others can approach them without risk of danger. Understand? Oh, yes, Dee-Sudra, Tall said, mispronouncing her name. It's all right. The name comes from the Philidian culture. Many in the capital have such names from all around this sinful world, she explained. The boy looked up, lost in thought, then leaned back in his side of the carriage. Tall looked to her. The Envant Bode says that sin has to be intentional. Dysandra paused before she spoke. That's right. Although the consequences of the sin still have to be accounted for. Once respective reparations are completed, one has to commune with Bonsmodis and petition him for forgiveness. The boy looked at her, eyes curious. Is that what we're doing? Dysandra didn't respond. The boy had evidently read scripture, and he had gotten the principle right. Dysandra herself had been instructed in the subtle meanings of the Envant Bodes, both by the previous arc of direction and purity, as well as by master scholars of the consortium. She had been older than Tall was at that time, although Dysandra pushed the thought out of her head. Dysandra mentally struggled with herself. She should have this boy locked up, if anything. The taint could take him at any moment. Maybe this was a mistake. I might be labeled as a heretic for not— What's a Philidian? Tall asked. Well, Tall, Philidia is one of 6 siblings. She's the sibling of maturity, uncertainty, and art. It's said that she settled in a crescent-shaped island down in the south between Sondheim and District 1. Supposedly, it's guarded by cursed waters, or some other such nonsense. Is she a god? Tall asked. She seems powerful enough to be one. No, Tall. You must understand that there is only one god. These siblings, they are fakes. People who attribute themselves to be relatives of the one true God. They hold power, yes, but they are not God's boy. Understand? She said, a firmness hiding behind her voice. Tall looked blankly for a second, then slumped into his side of the carriage. What use was it? This boy could turn into an abomination at any second. Better to keep him close and under her eye. Bothersome boy. Dysandra clicked her tongue and looked out the carriage window. They stopped. They shouldn't have stopped yet. They had at least a few more days until they reached the next waypoint. Perhaps they were taking their noonday break early. Dysandra tilted her head, channeling astral energy into her ears in an augmentation. She heard the light breeze rustle loose leaves as they scraped against a rock. Odd that she could hear that, but not Addie's raucous laughter, a deep-chested laugh that wasn't rare among the troops. She didn't hear Dorva play the balisette either, no soft plucking of the strings as she hummed. Something was amiss. Dissandra flung open the door and looked outside. An eerie chill was riding the winds. The felly growled, the fur on their backs rising up. They were spooked. Dissandra peeked back at Tal, still asleep in his position in the carriage. She dropped down, trying to inspect the convoy. The war vehicles were stationary, their felly and horses still harnessed, but antsy, increasingly agitated. But there was something missing. Soldiers. Dissandra saw no men or women moving about. She carefully walked forward, crouching behind the right front wheel of her carriage. Well, she found the soldiers asleep on the ground. Judging from their positions, it was quite spontaneous. Men lay asleep on top of their weapons, their arms and legs, in an odd manner. One of the felly gave a moderate roar. The soldier just a few feet from the massive cat didn't even flinch. It was Nixonian soul-binding by the look of things. They had a penchant for simulacrum. Bandits sprung from their hiding places in the bushes and foxholes as they climbed from the ground, then, barely looking around, not really checking for any that were somehow still awake. They wore simple clothes, with little leather armor. Various face coverings obscured Dissandra from seeing their faces. However, Dissandra didn't need to see their faces to know them. These were simple people. There was no way any of them were the source of the power. That means they had a soul binder of some kind nearby. They must have practiced this particular strategy before. It looked well rehearsed. Dissandra didn't know if she should compliment their bravery or stupidity. Stealing from an Imperium convoy was bad enough, but no, they had to choose the one with the dawning archpriestess in it. Whoever headed this was obviously a bad sunfruit. They whooped and hollered as they ran and began to unload equipment from the caravan. Dissandra knelt and said a small but thoughtful prayer. Then she silently stood up and dusted off her cloak with her hands. This was going to be fun. She'd have to savor it. She snuck through behind carts and wagons used to store provisions and equipment. The plains were empty. The most cover she would have would be her own caravan. She stood still. One of the bandits was rummaging through the cart closest to her, probably looking for wine. He fell to the ground without a sound. She moved on to the front of the caravan, which was pretty easy. The bandits were no longer on the lookout, but rather pillaging. She came across two others and dropped them with a few quick strokes of her knives. While this would be fun regardless, the most important thing now would be to find the enemy's soulbinder. They were the most dangerous at the moment. Dissandra remembered the lessons that Gid and Veki had drilled into her, drilled so much that the action had become implicit. She knelt down, fully aware of the numerous bandits going through weapons and medicine right by her. She reached out with her soul, feeling at the soulbinder with her astral energy. The power felt different from her own. Hers was a strong, fervent river. Theirs seemed like a slow stream, unpracticed and weak. So she followed it, looking for where it gradually got stronger. She opened her eyes, looking to her far right at a strange rock formation. They would be hiding in there. Not much out here on the plains, but they could have been hiding in the long grass, or safely secured in a deep foxhole like the others. It was better to check and make sure. Besides, it was almost impossible to track a soulbinder without using soul binding. She rolled her armored shoulders, feeling it give her a surge of strength and eagerness that she was all too pleased to oblige. She shot up, silent as a whisper. She bounced between covers, staying for a few seconds before moving to another. While the armor certainly wasn't made with stealth in mind, it wouldn't make loud sounds. No, the bandits would most likely see a whirl of light, sunlight, bounced from her armor's polished metal. Thankfully, she only needed speed right now. Dissandra was getting close. She could feel it get slightly more vibrant the closer she got. The convoy was a good 200 feet behind her, and only 15 more feet from her target. Dissandra shifted closer, rounding the rock formation on its left. She could hear distant mumbling. Yes, that was the Nixonian language. It always had an accompanying cadence to it, a movement to the pronunciation that they spoke, which made it sound like all one repeating word. Dissandra breathed out, tensing her legs. It was over in an eye blink. Dissandra jumped in front of a man with strange tattoos that covered his face. Two of her throwing knives found their mark. The man opened his mouth to scream, but Dissandra silenced him with a simulacrum, cutting off the energy the sound required. His form slowly slumped to the ground. Dissandra did a quick check of his body. Her fingers happened upon wretched potions and vile talismans. Heresy of the most stalwart kind. It was a blessing that one such as this found death. Heretic. A commotion of shouts resounded behind the rocks. The convoy. Dissandra sprang into motion, heedless of any attention she might draw, sprinting toward her carriage. 5 of the bandits had wrenched a writhing form from it. The boy. She was on them within moments, knives splayed before her as she cut down the first 2, helping with the kidnapping. Next, the man holding his arms. Then, one of the bandits held a crudely made knife at Tal's throat. Tal looked a bit roughed up, but besides the gag in his mouth, nothing seemed to cause him pain. The bandit holding him had the same strange tattoos on his face as the mystic one she had killed, but his were heavy under the eyes, with dots above his eyebrows. He wore a face covering reaching from ear to ear, hiding his mouth, but Dissandra spotted an ever so faint scar that peeked out from under it. He shouted something in a foreign tongue. Of course, Dissandra knew what he was saying. He was threatening to kill the boy if Dissandra even so much as stepped forward. That troubled her a great deal. Not only was she losing the boy, but it had concerned her that these bandits had even known their route, but she would have to solve that problem later. She dropped the 2 throwing knives she had in her hands. They clattered as they hit the ground, but she put her hands up in an acquiescing posture. He shouted something else and was met with other bandits. They looked at Dissandra with fear, then they departed. Dissandra could hear them as they raided one of the wagons and used it to escape, using some of the horses to pull it. She could hear Tal try to shout through the gag as they began to tote him away. Some time later, Dissandra sauntered in front of a line of soldiers, cooks, apprentices, and some medics, along with the Beastmaster and his few underlings, sweat on their brows and fear in their eyes. Each time she saw her chapter arranged before her, she was reminded of the diversity of it. No army was ever just soldiers. They needed stable boys, craftsmen, and quartermasters. It reminded her of a field of crops, and lines and rows of distinct plants, yet somehow they all swayed in the wind, coming together in unison. She felt a pang of loss at the realization, and quickly pulled her attention to her chapter. Earlier today, we had the unfortunate experience of being robbed. As I'm sure most of you know, I handled the situation, but a valuable asset was lost. Now, besides all of you being in a dumb, thoughtless stupor, I find greater disappointment, wickedness. They knew what asset I'm talking about. This route is known only to a select few, as it is one of the many in the Imperium's elite use. So, how did sinfully prolific bandits not only find us, but blindside us? The men tried to hold their breath as they slightly looked from left to right. Second hand to the Beastmaster and Lieutenant Liu. Present yourselves for the wretched heretics you are. Chaos and confusion broke out among the ranks. The second hand to the Beastmaster broke out a line as he ran for one of the felly. Not a second later, a knife thumped into his leg. The lieutenant knew better and walked to the front of his chapter. He looked straight ahead, defiance in his eyes. As per her orders, none of them were in their armor, so he knelt on his knees in a simple shirt and trousers. "Thank you, former Lieutenant Liu. Can someone graciously drag that dreadful bag of sin back here?" Dissandra all but yelled. She hadn't been very surprised at the betrayal of Lieutenant Liu. On the night outside of Breda, he had shown some defiance, questioning her. Only after she had 2 horses tied off to one side of a cart had she known that Liu had been talking with the hand to escape with the bandits. While the Beastmaster himself would care for the felly, the hand to the Beastmaster would attend to horses while he learned how to manage the massive antlered cats. They had found many They had been found untying the horses when Elia had seen them as she had awoken from the simulacrum. While she had been lying in the dirt at the time, she saw the 2 of them miss their chance as the bandits rode away. She had come to Dissandra soon after. Within moments, the hand was sat next to the lieutenant. Blood trickled from his thigh down to the ground, wetting the dirt under him. Now, it is one thing to commit sin under the banner of ignorance. But it's of an entirely different choice to know what's righteous and spit in the face of God as you do it anyway. Do you know which you are?" The lieutenant responded, but the hand mumbled something incoherent. Dissandra latched her hand on the hand's neck and lifted his body up. Dissandra latched her hand on the hand's neck and lifted him up, his body going erratic. "When being answered or addressed, I will be spoken to in a clear and intelligible manner. So to resume my question, which are you?" she hissed. "I'm a heathen," he breathlessly said with difficulty, his face red. "Thank you, second hand to the Beastmaster," she said as she dropped him. "You 2 are rejected by the Grand and Holy Imperium for sins against His Holiness in Gospel. Now that that's over, I'm going to give each of you a chance to redeem yourselves." She tossed one of her knives to the ground. "Whoever kills the other and shows to me that they are willing to destroy heresy will live. Labeled as a deserter and a heretic, left without mount or weapon, but alive." The 2 of them scrambled for the knife. The 2 struggling men wrestled with each other, breaking free and trying to reach the knife, still shiny despite the flecks of dirt that spotted the edge of it. Liu had gotten an advantage on the younger man, a strong arm around his neck as he threw him aside. Dissandra watched as the past lieutenant fell to the ground, grasping wildly. Dissandra knew that both would die. This just determined who died first. Being labeled as a heretic was as good as any death sentence, no matter where in the Imperium you found yourself in. Of course, out here on the plains, she doubted whether the winner would get far enough to reach any establishment. She felt no regret. She simply watched as 2 dead men tried to kill each other. Chapter 2. Philae. Every soul is precious, each a light and sound chorused. However, I slow to see them if they do go and hide, secret under the mountain and in the forest. Envant Bone Days. 4th couplet in Sons and Daughters, page 101. Dissandra walked through the thick underbrush. This Philae climate proffered humid air and animals that were far larger than what they were supposed to be. The local influence of the sister sibling had augmented both the plant life and the creatures. She needed the boy. If she were to present him to the monastery, she could discover how this taint was happening. And if further tests granted insight, she could experiment on a way to reverse or prevent it from spreading through the land. But first she needed the boy. The boy was key. The plan was to retrieve the asset and rendezvous with the convoy at the next waypoint. She would lead a small group of about 50 soldiers. She didn't hold hopes for most of them to survive. She was sure one had already managed to get pricked by a poisonous plant. While she could heal muscular and even skeletal injuries, it was hard to do so with poison or venom. It was easy to realign bone and connect the muscle fibers in a sliced shoulder, but purging something from the blood, it was said to be nearly impossible when healing another. She forged on. She needed that boy. The Imperium hadn't figured out what was causing people to taint. If she'd brought this boy back to the capital, they could figure out what was causing this, but she couldn't do that without a test subject. She tilted her head. She heard something fast, something. Oh, saints, she thought. A beast broke through, instantly impaling a few soldiers on its massive tusks. It roared and shook its massive head. Thick muscles rippled under its skin. Men cried and screamed in surprise and horror. She jumped back, pressing outward with astral energy, directing it towards the beast's senses. She pressed the feeling of fear on it, the immediate feeling of danger. The beast speared a couple of more men. She tried it again, harder this time. The beast flinched, but continued to crash through her ranks. Figures, she mentally said. She jumped high into the air, astral energy filling her muscles with power. She flew upward, then enjoyed a moment of weightlessness before she began to fall back down. She pulled throwing knives from concealed compartments within her armor. She aimed for the nose and eyes. They hit. The beast squealed in pain, men shuffling backward as the beast grew erratic. She landed on its head, her muscles transferring the impact of the landing into her augmented leg and hip muscles, astral energy healing and strengthening them. She raised to a low crouch, knives held loosely at her sides. She smoothly glided along its face, cutting along its eyes, snout, and ears. The beast bucked, and Dysandra was thrown into the air. She turned her head backward, marking the place she wanted to land. She kept her head straight as she fell, still looking at that place on the tusk, twisting her body to reorient herself as she alighted on its tusk. Sure feet kept her balance as the beast continued to writhe. She took out a knife and held it in her fingers, aiming. She pulled her astral energy into a singular point behind the knife and simply let go. The body shook the ground as it fell. The blade sunk deeply into the creature's skull. It had to be one of her longer sax knives if she were to do anything beyond angering it. Men looked at her with awe and a slow realization of fear. That is to be expected, men. With us in Philadelphia, we must be prepared for strange and menacious animals such as these. Don't fear me, men. While I am here, you stand a chance. Come, bring any wounded to me to heal, she announced. To their credit, the soldiers rushed to work, searching and checking for any who were wounded. While they searched, Dysandra jumped down as she looked at the beast. It resembled a boar, but accompanied with longer and more powerful legs and a more lean body, with the musculature of a panther, complete with long, lithe limbs. It was also huge, about 20 feet in length and 13 feet tall, a curious beast to be sure. While she heard the groaning of wounded men and the shifting of metal, Dysandra prowled about the creature. She climbed atop its thick head, placed a gauntleted hand on it, while the other gripped the handle of her sax knife. Yanking it free, she cleaned it, then sheathed it along her thigh. She walked around the creature, having slid down from its head as she pulled another one out of its snout. Perhaps bringing a force of 50 had been a mistake. If this was to be any sign of what this abomination of a forest could muster, what rested deeper in? The bandits had chosen their hideout well. Out of the Imperium lands and in a forest where only the insane would live, it had been a wonder that the native tribes hadn't cut them yet. She healed who she could. Some were, however, beyond recovery. They were just pumped with enough adrenaline to keep them awake, but their wounds were grievous. She sent them onward with a prayer for each of them. In total, they had lost 6 men, less than a drop when compared to a full chapter, but a discouraging amount of her lowly 44. They set up camp as the sun dropped behind the far-off mountains. To protect against further attacks from the local wildlife, Dissandra had erected wards around the camp. But since most of her talismans were back, Dissandra had erected wards around the camp. But since most of her talismans were back with the convoy, she had to do it the old-fashioned way. Concentration. She meditated in the middle of camp, keeping her focus and energy on the walls of astral energy that separated her men from the jungle. The men set up camp, assigned sentries, while others slept in shifts. Sorry, we'll go back a second. Laptop died. The old-fashioned way. Concentration. She meditated in the middle of camp, keeping her focus and energy on the walls of astral energy that separated her men from the jungle. The men set up camp and assigned sentries while others slept in shifts. While the wards would protect them, it was protocol to have sentries. With Dissandra concentrating on the ward, she could spare little attention to the forest, so sentries would be kept there to give signals of danger. Besides, if any of the beasts were as formidable and savage as the one before, she wasn't confident in her ability to ward it off indefinitely. Archpriestess, do you require any water or food? You've been out here for hours. Dissandra opened her eyes and realized the soldier was right. A deep night had fallen on them. Thank you, soldier, but no. I do not want for any water or food at this moment. Thank you for your concern and charity. May the Almighty keep you well and able, she said, clearly dismissing him. The man nodded and started to walk off, but raised his hand, rubbing the back of his neck. Yes, of course, Archpriestess. But I'd like to thank you for what you did earlier. You really saved us. Thank you for trying to heal Andros, for sending him to the Almighty with a prayer. I see now why the Almighty holds you in such high regards. Good night, sister. He walked back to his tent, but left Dissandra with an odd feeling. She wasn't used to being thanked. She didn't know what to think about the encounter. Beyond the gratitude, it struck her that she hadn't known his name. She usually made it a practice to learn her soldiers' names. She cared for them as a leader should and respected them for choosing to fight for the Almighty. Although the soldier had used sister, an honorific meant only to be used between arcs, so she would forgive him this one time. Reprimanding the soldier after he had just thanked her would have been in poor taste. She went back to her meditation. For the next few days, Dissandra and her small company made their way through Philadelphia. The forest was deep and captivating. It seemed almost as if it was composed from small biomes, a miniature world. She had lost 3 more men. By all accounts, that was pretty good. Dissandra had acclimated to the forest. Her increased sense of smell, hearing, and sight guided her company well. She memorized the sounds and smells of the more aggressive beasts, keeping track of certain territorial regions they prowled, even the plants. The extreme climate had proven to sire plants that held poisonous defenses. Then there was the red lotus. The men had coined that term after their first encounter with it. She should have captured a sample. She stopped momentarily and flipped open her flask and drank from it. There was just enough water to reach her mouth. She didn't swallow. There wasn't enough for that. It simply dissipated in her dry mouth. "Commander, what's the status of our supplies? Edibles, I mean," she asked as he came up behind her. "We used the last dregs of drinkable water this morning, Holiness. We have a considerable amount of bread, but not much meat. Most have either gone bad or been scavenged by the local wildlife. Troublesome." "Wait here, Commander. Set up a small camp, but don't let the company disperse. If needed, the soldiers will pair off in separate parties if required of the situation. Understood?" "Yes, Holiness, understood. When shall we expect your return?" he asked, a little concern seeping into his voice. "I don't know yet. I'm going to scout the area for drinkable water. Hold fast. If something does occur, light one of the flare arrows and fire it into the sky." "Understood," she clarified. "Understood, priestess. Fair travel." She strode ahead into the forest. The forest was enigmatic. There was a certain peace that Dissandra found in the silence, but it also held a passive threat towards her. Just because you can't hear it doesn't mean something wasn't hunting you. It was always optimal to have sights on a target without the target knowing your location, the opportune moment to strike, ambush them. She followed the denser foliage, plants that would require a large amount of water to sustain themselves. The bigger the plant, the bigger the water source, theoretically. She wove her way through the dense forest, carefully adjusting her course at the dull roar of the river. It seemed odd to her that it was so difficult to locate. The sound would reach an apparent crescendo only to fade as she advanced in that direction. All the plants and trees must have diffused the sound of the rushing water. She heard a whisper of a river as she avoided a fake with a particularly sharp thistles. She continued, letting her ear guide her toward the river. Dusk had alighted on the land, only adding to the deep shade that the tall trees cast. From what she could see of the sky, it was a brilliant orange and a soft purple. It seemed that even in Philadelphia they had nice sunsets. She burst from the foliage to see a riverbed. It was empty, no water. Dissandra's mouth went dry. Simulacrum, a form of astral energy directed towards the body's senses. It was used to fool the senses, to paint a fraudulent reality. But how? She'd been trained explicitly for this. She remembered the tenuous exercises she was subject to. She'd been tricked. When had it happened? Well, it explains why the sound of the river changed locations, and just when I got close enough to discover it was a ruse, she thought, to waste my time to... Red, uncertain light shouted at her from the sky. It was the flare. But no, it didn't matter when. The bandits had used their knowledge of the Philadelphia environment to their utmost leverage. The fact that the flare had recently been fired could only mean the bandits had spies keeping tabs on them, taking note of when they had gone low on drinkable water and other provisions. Dissandra raced through the foliage, allowing her armor to add to her strength and speed as her body became light in the rush back to camp. She could still see the trail of smoke linger on the horizon. It was clever, Dissandra thought, as she weaved to her left, barely avoiding a tree with rough bark. With all the astral signatures here, it makes for a perfect cover for spies. Dissandra picked through the records. She searched for clues, hints that might enlighten her as to what direction the attackers went. Dissandra drew closer, more confident of the location, as she recognized familiar scenery. She broke through some broad leaves from a low-hanging tree, her eyes trying to take in the information as quickly as possible. She sighed as she only saw a few bodies strewn on the ground. Dissandra counted them, only to find that 11 or so bodies had been left. So where were the remaining 30? But that was good. That meant her soldiers weren't massacred, but captured. Signs of a struggle were obvious and abundant. A broken branch here, an abnormality in the dirt there, a piece of fabric skewered on an awry branch. She pocketed the piece of fabric as she stood up. Indignant rage burned in her soul. She kept it well fed. She ravaged the forest section by area, by clearing, by observable landmarks. Dissandra followed these, walking and holding a bush-like plant to the side to peer down at the dark, rich soil. She didn't find any tracks that led very deep into the forest, and if she did, they had always rounded in on themselves. She accepted the reality that these bandits had ample knowledge of the forest and had covered their tracks well. She stalked back to camp, once again eyeing a piece of fabric that blew in the furtive wind. She must still be under the properties of a simulacrum. She would fight it, but there was too much information that the forest offered. To reject a simulacrum, you must first realize that you are under one, but then be able to pick out what is being forged. There was too much noise in the forest, too much scent, too much visual information. It was the perfect place to use simulacrum. It was probably the reason Dissandra had tracked the bandits into Philidae land, into this very forest. While Dissandra could sense a soul and even see it when she channeled astral energy in the right way, she doubted she could track them down that way either. Souls appeared like balls of swirling energy. While Becky had trained her to focus on what she wanted to find, it would be difficult to do the same in a massive environment like this. When she had tried to do so, she had been blinded by a curtain of light. All the souls, from the rocks a foot below the soil to the trunks of the daunting, beautiful trees. Oh, how clever, she mentally admitted. She stalked back the way they had first entered. Delia walked straight through a sheer cliff face. The illusion became blurry as she disturbed it. She found some bandits. They had tried to rob her. Tried was the key word. Even what she now knew was called a soul binder, a man with thick tattoos below his eyes and dots above his eyebrows, was on his knees in a few moments. She had found them a couple weeks ago with what she considered very valuable cargo. Her little darling brother. Apparently they had been in touch with some traders in the convoy itself. She had thanked Bonsmodis again for allowing such a lucky coincidence to occur. You see, the bandits were about to raid her village, until it was razed to the ground by that self-assuming priestess who was apparently still alive. Figures. From there, the bandits would follow the convoy and pick up on an interesting observation. They had brought someone from the remnants of the village. That meant he was of value to the Imperium, so they robbed an Imperial convoy. Only they weren't filled in on the secret that some insufferable wench of a priestess was heading said convoy. They lost nearly half of their raid party, and their leader's brother, a soulbinder as well, had been killed by that unhinged priestess, but they had kidnapped her brother, Tal. However they managed that, she had no idea. During their trip back to Philidae, Delia had met them and assumed command. The bandits already had some moles who helped supply information as to their route. She nodded to a few of the bandits as she passed. She was going to see her brother. He was being held, but for his own safety. Delia didn't want her only living relative to bail on her, so she put him on house arrest for the moment. She reached the door to his cabin, a room on the second level of the hideout, separate from the rest of the Imperial soldiers they had captured lately. She wanted him safe, not with a bunch of aggressive soldiers. Delia waited, a breath away from the door. She knew he was in there, yet she wavered. During the trip here, he'd spent the time away from her, avoiding his eyes. She was still his sister, yet could he welcome her as such? Delia dreaded the possibility that she might lose him again. She steeled herself. She undid the latch carefully so as to not bust the whole door off its hinges. She closed it behind her. The room would have been a little dark, but whatever had affected Delia's strength had also improved her vision. So she found that her brother Tal was huddled in the corner, shaking, trembling, because of her. "Hey, Tal, it's me, Delia. I'm your sister, remember?" she asked in a familial and slightly concerned tone. It was good to see her brother, but she hated that her mere appearance caused him fear. Above all, she just wanted to see him cared for and safe. She only wished he knew that. Upon hearing her voice, his form tried to crawl closer into the corner, away from Delia. Delia stifled a gasp, tears pushing at the edge of her eyes. She took a step closer to Tal, and her brother squirmed. She sighed and stepped back. This was the third time this had happened. Delia slowly crouched, eye level with the frightened boy. Please, Tal. My name is Delia. I know you remember me. Mom asked me to take care of you when she was working with Anam. I'm your older sister. Tal gave something between a whisper and a whimper, mildly incoherent for many, but not for her recently enhanced senses. He had only said one thing. Demon. He turned to her, a face uncertain, a face too troubled for one so young. I looked and my sister was gone. I couldn't find anyone. She didn't look like a demon. Delia collected herself, trying to keep her face from expressing the pain she felt at those words. I was out, bringing water from the well when I saw the fires. I didn't always look this way, but I promise you, Tal, I'd never hurt you. You're my brother, and I'm your sister. I'll wait till you remember that. From the bandits' leader, she had learned about what had happened to her body. It was called augmentation, only a level far higher than what he had ever seen before. It was astral energy that was directed towards the capabilities of the body to reaffirm muscles, making you stronger and faster, more resilient to damage. Only that wasn't the only thing that happened to her body. Her skin had taken on a faint but dark magenta hue. Her skin was thicker, the texture akin to worn leather. Her stature had grown taller, more tonality in her muscles, but in a way that did not displace or change her figure in any monumental way, but all that stood small in the presence of her horns. They were perhaps 5 inches long and arched closely over her head, but still splayed out, not perfectly straight. The bandits told her that her horns glowed sometimes, like the last vestiges of a dying ember. Delia herself tried to forget about them, choosing to focus on her wavy black hair that mostly obscured them. Her mother's hair had been dark like hers, the envy of almost every woman in Abrita. Alid, a strong farmer's son, had complimented her for it. Delia felt the weight of loss settle over her. From the way he had been paying attention to her, Delia was sure he was going to ask her to dance with him on festival night. She saw the way the bandits looked at her. Fear. Apparently that was no different from Tal. He shifted, his posture changing, allowing Delia to see more of his face. He looked uncertain. He looked at her, meeting her eyes with an unnameable expression, as if trying to gauge if someone he knew was behind a mask. Delia felt relief at this simple action. He was willing to look at her. She was caught off guard as a sound shook her and chilled her blood. It came again. No, it was not just any sound, it was a roar, that of an acutely savage beast, big from the dreadful bass in the creature's outcry. Bandits shouted to one another, warning their friends of what was coming. What was coming? Delia stood up, Tal looking around as if he heard the far-off rhythm. She looked at her brother. I need to go now. I think something's happening out there. I'll be back, Tal. I promise. She stepped out of Tal's room, locking it. She brushed a fledgling tear from her face. The ground shook slightly. What in the pit? Delia jogged to the front of the hideout, a pace that was more than adequately swift in her newly strengthened body. She arrived at a small walkway that served as a sort of terrace for the structure. She was honestly surprised that it didn't break or snap under the weight of her. It was hung to the ceiling of the cave of the hideout. The It was hung to the ceiling of the cave the hideout was built out of, and Delia questioned the safety of how it swung when she walked. It overlooked a moderately large span of land in front of the bandit's base. Her vision only ended at a thick tree line. She could see past the simulacrum from this side. The trees shook. The tips of them danced in reaction to something big by the looks of it. The tree line broke and a hulking creature burst through. Sprays of dirt and branches flung into the air. The creature looked like a massive hog with tusks that were at least 15 feet long. Only it wasn't proportioned like a hog. Its limbs were occupied with lithe sinew that stretched in long legs. The bandits yelled and hurled spears at it, some shooting arrows into its thick hide. Delia gasped as arrows simply shot through some portions of the body. With it coming closer, she could see that it looked to be dead. The skin was baggy as it hung off the muscles, a sight straight out of the deepest pit in perdition from the 10th circle of hell itself. Only then did Delia realize that it was terrifyingly close. Really close? Great, she thought mentally, rolling her eyes. The beast collided with the bandit's hideaway. Dysandra prayed for repentance. Because of the prestigious titles she had attained, she did have the permission to raise an eidolon, but she saw it as immensely disrespectful and inappropriate when more righteous means were still viable. She had traced her steps back to where they were attacked by the beast, where Dysandra subsequently put the poor thing down. She pushed her astral energy into the corpse of it. To raise an eidolon was to use a technique called altering, to change or enhance the nature of an object by using one's own astral energy. And since the thing was no longer alive, it meant the divine and precursory standards for what an object was to be considered. Technically speaking, this was under the guidelines of a reinstation, a subset of altering. It occurred when a series of objects were combined, giving complex commands, all while using astral energy as a battery. A feat, to be sure. She instructed it to smell its way to the bandit's base. Some of the sensory tissue in the beast's nose hadn't fully decomposed yet. All it needed was energy to get it working again. She had let the beast sniff the piece of cloth she had recovered earlier and let it do the tracking. She couldn't trust her nose. She was still under a simulacrum, but she could trust the nose of her newly revived eidolon. She now watched her affront to the natural order run straight through a cliff face. Then the simulacrum was exhausted, and she could accurately see what was actually happening. Her foul beast tore through the hideout, and Dysandra had to mentally command it to stall and keep most of the structure intact. She needed the boy. She didn't need him dead. She leaped out of the shadow of the trees and made a beeline for the hideout, skirting the area where her eidolon fought with the bandits. She didn't have to worry about being spotted. The bandits had bigger, more pressing problems at the moment. She ran through what she presumed to be the entrance and searched the crudely constructed building for her soldiers and for the boy. She guessed that her men would be held somewhere out of the way, maybe in the back. After making her way through some hallways, she was rewarded with the sight of her men, albeit imprisoned, but that wasn't a problem. She slashed clean through the walk. Any who are of able body to come to the front. All right, 2/3 of you will search the base for where they have placed your weapons and equipment. The remaining 1/3 will help the wounded or unable out of this structure. Both groups will head toward the place where the creature attacked us. If you arrive at the rendezvous point and don't see either me or the other group until morning, try to make it out of this forest and back to the convoy. Understood? A few of the soldiers answered in a discordant, "Yes, priestess." She made for the top levels of the building. High-level hostages were normally held separate from other prisoners. The bandits knew this, so the top gave them enough sight to see an incoming threat and enough time to act accordingly. Plus, the fact that he was a hostage or of consequential value meant that the bandits would naturally put him physically higher than the others. While a youth, she had questioned the exercises that Becky had pressed upon all of them, but more and more she was beginning to see the benefits. Not that she condoned the way Becky had taught them, though. She made her way through passages and climbed a ladder to the upper levels. She ignored rooms without any doors and continued to look for the boy. She sprinted down the hall, suddenly stopping. She heard whispering. No, she heard whimpering, suppressed and defeated. There. She swiftly dodged around debris and followed the quiet noise of the crying boy. She found herself in front of a door complete with bolted lock. The bolt slid free as she cut it. Dissandra slowly and carefully entered the room. "Tall?" she asked questioningly. The boy froze as he looked at her, then immediately rushed toward her in embrace. He hugged her leg in desperation, no words, just the look of relief on a boy's very young face. Hey now, Tall. I need you to stick very close to me. Do you understand? I'm going to get you out of here." Tall shouted in fear as Dissandra's form was radically shunted into the back wall. A she-demon hurriedly took Tall and ran. Her form wasn't much more than a blur with a few detectable details. Again, Dissandra reprimanded herself, as she should have been more aware of the possibility that she would have been here. It had been highly unlikely, but that was no excuse. Dissandra groaned and lifted herself to her feet and began to pursue. She was not expecting to see the demoness so soon, the one that had bested her at the village. Only now her form had developed more to reflect that of her true nature. But why? Dissandra questioned herself. Why did that heretic want the boy? She shook off the question and ran down the hall. Perhaps somehow she knew that Tall was one of her own by astral identification. No, it was too soon for her to have that ability. The demoness needed more time to mature. That had been what the last awakened had said. Dissandra slowly decreased her pace. It was a fool's errand to try and catch up and fight while trying to retrieve Tall. While Dissandra could fight and catch up with the demoness, she wasn't sure she would do so and leave Tall unharmed. She knew that the demoness was likely thought the same and would likely put him down a deal. She knew the demoness likely thought the same and would likely put him down to deal with Dissandra. She stopped and looked to her left, an armory. From where she was standing in the hall, she could see it had been effectively ransacked by her own men. So they have found their gear. Good, she thought. She walked in and assessed what was left. She saw pieces of armor left in a rush to get out of the complex. She even spied 3 crude knives left behind by the bandits. Beside them lay a body, likely stabbed by one of her soldiers, as she didn't recognize it. She sighed. Well, she'd already done it once today. Delia practically dropped Tall. She was careful to handle him with care, especially with her new body. But his constant struggling made that somewhat difficult. She burst into the tree line and practically had to hold her brother in place as she sat him down. Come on, Tal, you have to recognize me. I'm your sister, for Almighty's sake. I'm not going to hurt you. That woman tried to kill me. I don't know why she had you, but all I know is that she doesn't see you for a person, but something. Come on, just try to remember me, she pleaded with her little brother. Tall sat still, tears wetting his eyes. He looked back at her, then back toward the hideout, toward the nutso priestess. I'm telling the truth, I promise. A string of thoughts rushed towards Tall's face. He seemed to come to grips with himself. Oh, Almighty, thank you. Okay, Tall, I'm going to start running now, so hold tight to me and don't let go, all right? I'm just going to... Something cut her off. Bushes rustled off to Delia's right. Dissandra? Tall asked, a far-off look in his eyes. Who's The priestess emerged from the foliage in front of Delia. Delia exploded into motion and threw a kick at the priestess's face. She managed to dodge and jumped back a little, heaving an assortment of knives at Delia. She reacted in time to weave between most, but 2 hit her in the arm. They bounced off but smarted. She lunged towards the person that burned down her village and continued to fight. Dissandra said a prayer of gratitude. The demoness chased her into the jungle. Well, it was not her, but a fake. She was quite surprised that it even worked. She had taken the discarded pieces of armor she had found in the armory and stitched them together with her astral energy. The eidolon, being encased in the pieces of armor, held a likeness to her if viewed at a distance. Controlling not only one but two disoriented her. It took some concentration to maintain one. With two, she felt her attention weaken. Dissandra attached weapons to it so it could further the illusion of a real combatant. She laid in wait for a couple more moments until she was sure she was clear. Dissandra ran toward Tal, her pace slowed as she neared him. The young boy looked tremendously confused. "But you... over there, huh?" "No time to explain. We've got to get you out of here, Tal. Come on." "Tal?" Uncertainty was lathering her voice. The young boy looked in the direction of the fake Dissandra that led away the demoness. Dissandra could hear the confrontation. The dummy Dissandra would not last long. "Please, Tal, we've got to get you out of here. It's dangerous, and that she-demon will be back any minute. Stay with me," she said. The child looked even more conflicted. "She said she was my sister." His voice was soft and weak. "I don't know that she is, Tal. Mine's become warped by sin, and she has already started to mature as a demon. Tal, I swear I won't let anything like this happen again." "You've got to trust me, Tal," she said, firm undertones starting to poke through. The boy nodded. Without a second thought, Dissandra swept him up and whistled. Her eidolon turned its head in her direction and ran over, only taking a few seconds to do so. She didn't have to worry about the bandits. If they did survive the horrendous onslaught, they were in no condition to fight or chase her. She clamped down on the boy and jumped, astral energy strengthening her legs and hips. They landed on the undead beast, and she commanded it to run to the rendezvous point. The beast surged into the forest, leaving the hideaway in its rapid wake. Interlude. Labor. Patience with goals of unknown purpose does clear the mind, and when looked upon from future days, know that your character has been refined. Envant Bodes, 16th couplet in The Way of Paths, page 3. Draven of the uncrowned consort swept the floor. The broom barely qualified as one. It wasn't much more than a bundle of sticks tied to a bigger yet just as flimsy stick. Actually, it was just that. A group of people walked by, and Draven's meager pile of dust and particulates were scattered and destroyed. He looked up at the Almighty in the sky above, then he went back to his task of sweeping the courtyard. Thankfully, the trees provided him with shade, and on the not-so-thankful side of things, the trees would also drop tiny twigs and flower petals on the ground. Draven might hunt heretics and battle demon spawn, but this brutal torment made him rethink his interrogation methods. He'd rather fight a devil than be in this courtyard to forever sweep as the wind blew particulate into it. As people, despite looking completely engaged in something else, always managed to walk into a freshly swept pile of dust. Draven questioned why he was in some out-of-the-way shrine located in Philadelphia of all places. How much trouble could a Cartanilli splinter religion do in the sticks? Who'd they convert? The local tribes? Oh, maybe the beasts. He brushed his hands on his clothes and ran one through his raven black hair. He looked back at his hand and saw dust. Great. Not only am I covered in dirt and dust, but my hair is too, he thought. This assignment had only begun, but it was already taxing his patience, or whatever was left of it anyways. Others got assignments all around Cordania. To Nixion with their weekly day of silence and lively nightlife, or even Folly with their renowned theater performances and their floating lanterns. Draven had heard it said that the best-looking women came from folly, but he'd always admired the sturdy build of Imperium women. A monk walked into the courtyard, posture firm and respectful. He stopped and opened his eyes as he looked down on the pile Draven had just made. The monk gave him a weak smile and patted him on the shoulder, then walked away. What in the almighty sacred name just happened? Draven thought. Was that monk pitying me? If only he knew who he was pitying, I should eviscerate that bald-headed piece of heretical. Draven calmed himself, a breath escaping his mouth. It'd be a miracle if he didn't burn this dawning place to the ground. Then he continued to clean. Afterward, he retired to his room in the monastery. He sighed as he basically dropped himself on his bunk. Maybe a good-natured nap would help him release his frustration, or at least Draven hoped. The cot groaned. He shifted his weight violently to make the cot groan again. If he couldn't make it be quiet, he would make it groan. It didn't. He had trouble dispelling the tempting thoughts of burning the whole establishment to a smoldering wreck, but by the grace of God he didn't. Somehow, he didn't. Well, if the bed was going to misbehave, then he would just do something else. Better to keep himself occupied. He went about the other chores as they took him well into the night. The night sky held many stars. Draven could see the constellation of Santu. He drew the shape of the sibling in his mind, taking the cluster of stars and superimposing the visage of the sibling. He laid down the bucket of cold water and dropped the cloth by it. He sat down and slowly began to recline his body until he was lying on the stone he was supposed to be scrubbing. It felt like his eyes began to widen as he stared up into the heavens. The night was quiet too, only a comfortable breeze to rustle the trees or touch his skin. It tossed his hair slightly and blew under his shirt. Draven could only describe it as majestic. The dim light cast a comforting contrast into the night. The wind was tender and soft with a hint of forcefulness. He loved nights like this. He remembered many nights in his own personal monastery doing just this. He was laying down, enjoying a small figure climbed down the small steps to the courtyard. Don't you have a bed? My pa always told me to stay away from people who slept on the ground, but you seem friendly, are you? The young girl asked. Am I what? He responded as he opened one eye. Friendly, she answered him, full of excitement. Just so long as you don't disturb me, just let me lay here. The little girl dumped herself on the ground, laying right next to him. Alone, he sighed, but since you're here, why are you here? The girl stayed silent and looked at the sky, not meeting his eyes in an intentional way. Fair enough, fair enough. Do you know what that constellation is? He said, gesturing at a small group of sparsely laid stars. The girl gave him an obvious negative. That's the hunter Philaday. It's said that he impressed the sibling with his resolve for nature. He has vowed to reside in the wild places so that he can be with his lover, Philaday. Huh. Is this a love story? I didn't know it was going to be a love story. How'd they even meet in the first place, huh? She asked, impatience failing to cover her alleged disgust. Ah, yes, he was an outcast, and his own people resented him. It was only a matter of time before they blamed him for the death of someone in their community, and so he fled, running until he found wilderness to hide himself in. Philaday took a liking to him and raised a bull-top tree to keep him from the rain. When he awoke, he questioned her after her kindness. She told him that he was like an animal gone astray, separated from his pack. The moon would rise and fall many times until they would meet again, but there was a problem. The man was hungry, and so as a test, Philaday sent him an animal he could easily kill. The hunger overtook the young man, and he killed the innocent animal. Philaday was furious. She wanted to see that no matter how hungry the hunter got, he wouldn't harm any of her children, he explained. That doesn't sound like a love story. You must be a weird man if you think that's a love story, the girl admonished him. I'm not done, he simply said. Oh, go on then. What happens? She asked emphatically. Well, the story goes that she would go somewhere else, and the plants would die as winter came. When she came back, she would bring spring. One of these times, Philaday was enjoying the spring, but she felt the need to run, to feel nature. So she transformed herself into a stately filly, one with nice, majestic antlers. But unknown to her, a poacher was following her, waiting for the best moment to shoot the majestic beast. The poacher was about to kill Philaday when the hunter from so many winters ago fought the man off and saved his love. Wow, the little girl said. Philaday rethought and decided that she had been too quick to judge the hunter, and they embraced. To show her appreciation for the hunter, Philaday created the blue star, a rare flower that is said to heal any ailment or malady. The hunter told his love that he had never slain a beast since, only living off plants and herbs to sustain himself. They rejoiced in each other, but Philaday had duties and responsibilities. She was still a sibling after all. The hunter would then inhabit the wilds, the place he felt closest to his love. Now, on the first day of spring, all hunting is banned to remember the two lovers, Draven finished. Wow, said the girl in a quiet voice. More. Tell me another story. Draven chuckled. I'm afraid that's all I have for one night. But I'll make you a deal. Come back tomorrow night and I'll tell you another one. Wow, really? She asked. Yes, really? Now get on home, or you'll be too tired to listen to me the coming night. Come on, I'll still be here. Go on, Draven exclaimed. Okay, you better have a good story for me next time. Goodbye now, weird stranger, she happily said as she scampered out of the courtyard. Her form stopped once she reached the top of the steps, as if to see if Draven would disappear. Then she dashed out of his sight, obstructed by the form of the monastery. Draven sighed and continued to gaze into the star-filled night.
Chapter 3. Tolerance. Looking towards strength requires a soul to practice affliction. Carry it, and by subtle tellings know that I give a benediction. Envand Bodé's 14th couplet in The Way of Paths, page 2. Nothing else happened to the convoy once they crossed the border of District 7, the district she had been given to lead and govern. From the border of Philaday and Bondays, their convoy had traveled faster. A couple weeks later, as they arrived, she only had a few administrative responsibilities, and Dissandra let her convoy through the walls of District 7's capital city. Of course, it wasn't the city proper, but an Imperium garrison, where the convoy could be logged, prepared, and kept until duty required its service. She gave the men leave and thanked them for their service. She left the care of the convoy to that of the Imperium staff tasked with repairing it. Once she had arrived, she had immediately sent after a messenger boy. But then again, the Herald of Proclamation would have to then take this personally and divvy it up between his trusted messengers. While she didn't concern herself with the details, she did need her brothers and sister here. Her feet carried her to familiar locations, the garrison, the monastery, her monastery now. The building was immaculate, made with the best architects the Imperium could provide, the beautiful high-vaulted arches and detail that couldn't help but draw the eye. Most saw it as a holy place, perhaps a house of worship. And while it did qualify for those, it was really nowhere near as sublime as that. It would take an exceptional eye to recognize that the monastery was beautiful, yes, but behind all that splendor it was built for war, a place to make a stand against a siege. God had required that of all of his monasteries, to be a place of final refuge for the soul, but for the body as well. She pushed open the large oak doors in the front. Tall walking beside her, she sauntered in, and many a holy practitioner gasped and cast their eyes at the tiled floor. It was a sign of respect for the archpriestess, and of fear. She couldn't blame them. They were the same thing in her eyes. How could you respect something if it held no power? You were granted respect because of your power, or because of the way you used it. She wound her way up the staircase in the back, Tall breathing heavily behind her as they progressed upward. Many also saw the staircase as a thing of beauty, of status, but in reality the staircase was invented as a preventative measure. Many were right-handed. Because many were right-handed, it allowed the resident soldier higher on the staircase the opportunity to strike first, but it also saved space as well. She found her dedicated room at the pinnacle of the monastery. She waited just in front of the door. This was one of the holier places in the building. It allowed the archpriestess or archpriest to be closest to God, as was their right for holding an office such as theirs. She held her gaze with the wooden door, memories swirling in her mind. As she opened the door, she made contact with the barrier, and with a series of commands, it opened as well, an added measure of security. Similar barriers lay dormant along the walls of the monastery, stretching out to the premises as well. Tall surged ahead of Dissandra, inspecting the room eagerly. Dissandra watched him as she closed the door behind her. "That's my copy of Envand Bodes, passed down by arch to arch. If you are to look through it, please handle it with care," she said as she draped her white robe over its stand. Despite the rough journey through Philidae, jungle, and forest, it looked no worse for wear. No holes, no tears, no discoloration. In fact, this robe was at least 500 years old. The robe had been passed down from archpriest to archpriestess and eventually to finally her. She undid the latches that held her armor in place, working from the top to the bottom. She carefully laid it on its own stand. Despite it being armor, it was still to be treated with reverence. She found herself marveling at it as she placed a pauldron on the stand. The armor had delicate carvings and intricate characters etched into the metal, and in defiance of any abuse the metal took, none of them had been deformed. She sat on the bed, and Tall joined her as she unlaced her boots, setting them aside as well. But he didn't say a word. He just watched her handle her garments and equipment with grace and reverence. Next, Dissandra pulled a box from her personal altar. It was breathtaking, gold inlays that adorned not wood but white marble. The inlays portrayed religious figures, saints, and the words Adiotes, Bonsmodis, Arcanarnia, Accursius, Solarius. She lifted the lid and set it on a piece of satin cloth. While the armor would hold her knives for her, a similar function had been served by her clothing. And while the armor had held knives, she also had a reserve. Each arch was supposed to be close to their weapon at all times, even when their armor wasn't close. However, the two could connect along points in the armor, allowing her access to the knives. These pockets in the armor would correlate to armored portions on her undersuit. Made of leather and a strong white fabric, it also had light metal plates. She knelt and straightened her back. She placed her hand near her collarbone. Her fingers slipped into the hidden seam, pulling out a silvery white knife with delicate imagery as well. Such intricate detail seemed like it should not belong on such a thing as a weapon. She laid it in its designated place in the velvet-lined box. Then there was another and another as she continued to pull knives from various pockets along her body. She had not lost one knife on the journey. All of them had been retrieved after use. She picked one from a pocket by her thigh. "Seems like a lot of knives." "Well, little one, there are a lot of knives," she responded coldly. He didn't respond, but next to her, as she put a longer knife into the box, this one lengthwise, as it was too big to put in normally. "These are pretty, though," he observed, an outstretched hand about to touch one. Dissandra's hand shot out and grasped his wrist in a vice-like grip. "You are not to touch these knives, boy. Do you understand me?" "Yes, I'm sorry, Dissandra. I didn't know," he said, averting his eyes from the reach of hers. "It's all right, little one. You knew no better, and therefore aren't at fault, as you were ignorant. I forgive you, she said, letting his wrist go. He tucked his wrist close to his body. Dysandra pulled a knife from a compartment on her left arm by the bicep. Tal rubbed his wrist. She placed the knife in the box and turned to face Tal and waited. Once he noticed, he quickly turned his back to her. Dysandra didn't need her increased hearing to know the boy was almost failing in his attempts to stop himself from crying. She sat there dumbfounded. She wasn't trained for this. Comforting a little boy was not something Dysandra was used to doing. She could lead armies and ravage the enemies of her father, but now she found herself helpless, arms held loosely to her sides. Little one, I apologize. I may have forgotten my own strength and inadvertently harmed you. Tal snuffed. I don't even know what apologies even means, he said, mispronouncing the apparently foreign word. It means that I am sorry, she sighed. Your wrist? Show it to me. He refused to turn, still sniffling. Dysandra bit her tongue. She could stomach his rambling and his heretical nature, but she would not be ignored. Tal, you will show your wrist to me, and you will respect what I say, boy. Now, show me your wrist. He cringed at her elevated voice, but obeyed as he slowly turned to face her, holding out his wrist. It was already red with some promise of turning purple. Oh, little one, I didn't realize. Hold it still for me, she said as she placed her left hand under the wrist and her right hand above it. As she placed her left hand under her wrist and her right hand above it, she tapped into her soul and took a piece of astral energy, directing it towards the boy's injury. Healing yourself was easier than healing others. With yourself, your spirit already knew how the body was supposed to function and perform intrinsically. When healing yourself, your body automatically knew how to use it to mend and strengthen. It still took practice, of course, but healing another was far more difficult. You used astral energy to fix what you think needs fixing. Guesswork. You need knowledge on how it needs to be healed, where, and more variables as the situation rises, like grabbing an object when your hand is numb. She pressed astral energy into Tal's wrist, simultaneously soothing the body with the simulacrum as she healed it from the inside out. It feels warm, Tal said. Yes, while it is not needed when healing, I find it helps to put people at ease. People like to feel warm, she explained. Tal nodded, his eyes captivated by the light that had begun to spill from her hands. The light permeated his injured wrist, falling from her hands. After healing the muscle, she began to apply astral energy to his skin to calm the more agitated regions. She finished and questioningly looked at the boy. Better? She asked. Uh-huh, it feels way better. How'd you do that? Oh, I bet it was magic, he said. Dysandra turned back to relieving herself of her knives. Not magic, boy, soul binding. Magic is a term that only heretics and the uneducated use. Oh, Tal said, crestfallen. What is it now? Dysandra asked. Well, you just told me that magic doesn't exist. It's forever dead now. Wait. No, I moved a branch with my mind this one time. That had to be magic. Dysandra tried to count the number of things in that sentence alone that would label him as a heretic. She breathed out of her nose. Was it perhaps windy? She prodded. Yeah, wait, how did you know that? I've never told anyone that in my whole long life. Because magic does not exist. To believe in magic is to believe that you can gain power from some other source besides the Almighty. Heresy. But what we do have is soul binding, the ability to use astral energy to influence and affect what we perceive and know, to heal, like I just did with you. Remember that well, boy, she explained, once again finding herself teaching gospel to this heretic. Dysandra stood up and undid a few clasps behind her back. She pulled the chest portion of her concealed armor off and placed it on the stand as well. Ew! Tal exclaimed. Dysandra rolled her eyes. I'm still wearing clothing. It's an undershirt. That's all. The boy rushed a hand over his innocent face to cover his innocent eyes. I'm blind! I'm blind! Dysandra pulled an overshirt from her closet and promptly threw it at the boy's head. It caught him in the face. Direct hit, she thought uncharacteristically. Then she composed herself, critiquing her actions. While it had been wise to heal him for the fear of the taint manifesting, she would not let her guard down by playing with the child. She pulled out one for herself and slipped into it. What was that for? Tall questioned, pulling the shirt from his head. Your clothing is filthy. Still has dirt on it. That's the replacement. Put it on, she ordered. Tall went quiet as he inspected the new shirt. This is a girl's shirt. If I put this on, I'ma die. I'm infested with cuties. Ugh. Dysandra silently prayed for more patience. Look, I didn't have the time to get you proper clothing. We just got to the capital. A miracle we still arrived on schedule as it is. You will wear that shirt, or you will wear no shirt. I'm fine with both. Begrudgingly, and with a healthy amount of what must have been pure agonizing pain, Tall managed to get into the new shirt. When Tall was done, Dysandra motioned to her bed. Sleep, she commanded. Tall climbed into a bed intended for a more than marginally larger person. What about you? He asked. I will meditate for the remainder of the night. You are special to me, and as such I will make sure you are not taken again. Sleep. And no complaints about sleeping in that same bed that a girl has. I didn't even think of that. Ew! Dysandra left the boy at sunup. Without her to personally give the boy permission to cross the barrier, it would keep him in, just as it would have kept him out if Dysandra had not been there. She left the monastery and savored the bare streets. It was early in the morning. The merchants and citizens, businessmen and hustlers would bleed out as the sun rose higher in the sky. But she did know one place that was open at this hour, a simple clothing store with good deals. She was an archpriestess, so money wasn't even an afterthought. Most people let her have materials and objects, more of a publicity stunt and an endorsement than anything else. As an arch, she was always a predominant social figure, idealized by the people in her district. To be visited by an arch was rare, so to supply one would bring great renown and better business. Likewise, it wasn't abnormal for sculptors and painters to approach an arch in hopes of capturing their likeness. To do so would instantly pull the artist into prestige and recognition. The Imperium allowed this to have a representation of in order to have a representation of each of the past arcs. Dysandra had reluctantly agreed to one once out of necessity, but politely refused any subsequent. She opened the door and knocked on the door frame. Moments later, Dona came to the desk. What can I do for you this fine morning, priestess? A new overcoat, perhaps? Don't tell me that the one you have is any good. You've worn that same piece since I can remember. Thank you, no. But what I need is a set of clothes for a small boy. At least 3 pairs. Do you have something like that in stock? She asked. The old woman shrugged her shoulders. Maybe. What are they for exactly? She could help me thin the herd to find the perfect choice for you. I'm afraid not. Simple clothes, but in good condition, she stated. Dona had a proclivity for trying to talk, trying to get information, even though she knew she'd never get anything out of Dysandra. That was one of the reasons she liked coming here when needs would arise. Of course. No, because I don't know. Maybe you finally got that son I'm always telling you to have? You know I cannot. I have forsworn it. Don't tell me you have the ability to miraculously, mentally search your stores. I wish. Be back in about a moment, she said, taking the hint. The woman disappeared in the back and came out a short time later. She laid out at least 10 sets of clothes to choose from, each slightly varied in size or make. But that was of little consequence to her. She chose a few of the more durable options and bade the older woman well. She flipped a golden dina, hearing it as it landed in front of her, and spun. A more than modest tip. She made her way back to her room in the monastery and set the clothes on the foot of the bed. She placed her hand on the pile and recited an incantation. It was an old one, but Dissandra found it was impossibly useful. She recited a few more. Tall slept softly, the sight of the boy sleeping so peacefully that it set Dissandra's mind ablaze with moral ambiguity. He was to be presented to the court today. Then the tests would begin to find out more about his taint. The letter summoning her sisters and brothers had already been sent the very night she arrived. And here she had brought him, sleeping in a proverbial den of thieves. She breathed deeply before closing the door, resealing the astral energy. She left the room, again her feet deciding their own route as her mind puzzled. Soon she found herself on the roof of the monastery. She always found herself up here somehow. It was a place she often frequented, and it was so peaceful and clear up here. The higher perspective made Dissandra sigh in content. She could see the whole city from here, the larger building toward the heart of the city. Then it would get gradually smaller as it spanned outward. She could see the twinkle of rivers that ran through the city. The reflection of the sky played on its clear waters. Why did she feel so conflicted? The boy had caused her nothing but trouble. He was a heretic, an abomination in the works. They'd only barely managed to stop the taint from eating further into the Imperium. God himself had tasked her and her sisters, her brothers, and many more, in fact, to stunt this viral disease. But then again, she didn't have to heal him last night. Why did she? The wind blew her dirty blonde hair away from her face. It was short. Long hair could prove to be problematic when in a combative situation, so it only reached down to her shoulders. She sighed, standing up, her feet balancing on the delicate architecture. She took a breath, and she let herself fall off the edge of the high building. She fell for a considerable time. The monastery was quite spacious. The ground approached greedily, but she didn't let it bother her. This was freedom. The wind kissed her face. Nothing else could bother her. She breathed in and let astral power flood her limbs and her body, bracing them with augmentation. She landed with grace and strength, much more befitting a simple jump than a fall from those heights. Some people were out at this time. They rubbed their eyes and looked from her to the spires that adorned the monastery. They repeated the cycle a couple times more. Dissandra sensed the formula pulse with energy, a string that tugged on her soul that meant Tal was awake. Dissandra threw open the doors to her monastery, a clear sign that it was open for those who wanted to worship today. After that, she made her way yet again to her room. Tal had just barely woken up. He yawned, stretching as he did. Dissandra walked until she was right in front of him, pointing to where she had placed his clothes earlier. "Those are your clothes. You will wear them, so pick out what you want to wear for the day. You are to remain by my side at all times. When that is not possible, you will be here in my room. You will not escape or pursue adventure while you are here. You are to wait for me and only me. Is that understood?" Tal rubbed his eyes. Am I supposed to take that as an affirmative? Tal articulated. Dissandra steadied her breathing. "Get changed." Tal limped off the bed and picked through the pile of clothes Dissandra had brought him. He settled on brown trousers and an off-white shirt. Then he waited. His eyes drifted down to his feet. "What is it?" she asked. "Well, you're here, and..." Dissandra mentally face-palmed. "Children." She turned away from him and let the boy change into his new clothes. "Okay, I'm done," he declared. Dissandra turned on her heel to look at the young boy. She stooped down to him, one knee resting on the floor. She gestured for him to move his arms up. When he did, Dissandra held the collar of the shirt and pulled up. "You had it on backward. The buttons will tell you which side is the front," she explained. She rotated the shirt and pulled it down over him. Much better. Now, you are to wait here while I go about my activities. Don't leave this room. I will be back to retrieve you shortly." She locked the door behind her. She needed time to think, or rather, not think. Her 8 siblings would be arriving today, a little before sundown. Tomorrow they would hold court over the fate of the boy. Her nerves sprouted at the thought. She walked down the stairs, and despite the spacious nature of the building, it was completely silent. Not even her footsteps as she descended down the staircase to ground level. There were a few people who had come to worship. The porters that tended to them spoke in soft whispered tones. She walked to one of the seats in front of a painting of Bonsmodis. She stood herself in front of it, eyes earnestly focused on the painting, as if it could substitute for real guidance given by Bonsmodis himself. If only, she thought. Bonsmodis, their god, their father. It depicted a muscular figure wreathed in flowing robes of white, a horned and feathered snake clutched in his hand, while the other held a sword that gleamed with light and entirely enveloped with flame. And despite the struggle, Bonsmodis' eyes held a certain mourning. It was supposed to symbolize that he did not want to kill whoever committed sin, but that he would for the salvation of man. It was said that Mr. Deodaw, founder of the monastery and its first archpriest, had painted it. It was one of Dessandra's favorites. The meaning was not lost on her. A messenger ran up to her, short gasps of breath preventing him from delivering the news verbally. He held out a sealed piece of parchment. Dessandra shook herself and took the parchment. She tore off the wax seal and unfurled it, her eyes combing through the answer to her summons. The letter was official. Intricate designs marked the borders, and the bottom held the signatures from all 8 of her brothers and sisters. They would be in the city by dusk for the trial she had summoned them for. She had unofficially sent messengers while traveling back from Philadelphia. Urgent matters like this required a quick response, and while formality was held as a standard throughout the empire, they could be bent in times of emergency. They didn't have time for the months the other arches would take to get to her district, nor for the months that the different heraldries would require. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of Tall's trial. Of course, all this was just formality. The boy would be tested. It was just a matter of time. After tonight, Tall would see why Dessandra had brought him here. She nodded in dismissal, and the messenger ran off. She had made arrangements for Tall to be transferred to the dungeons. She couldn't bear to do it herself. The less contact she had with him, the better. She had already grown too close to the boy. She needed him to be kept out of the way until the trial could start. Dessandra sat atop the city wall, her eyes following the first of her sister's convoys. The banner flapped in the wind and bore the colors of Kitrini. The convoy was still a few miles out. "So how have you been, my oh-so-punctilious sister of mine? I've heard stories about you liberating a legion of dilapidated poor soldiers, your figure proud and strong as you ride a particularly impressive eidolon," Kitrini said as she approached her from the side. Her blue armor was a fitting contrast to her piercing amber eyes and wavy brown hair. 2 messy strands pulled to either side of her face. She must have left her helm with the convoy then. "Ahead of your company, I see. Glad to see you haven't changed much, sister," she responded. "Well, it's just they're so terribly slow. Plus, I doubt they will be attacked so close to the city gates. Plus, it gave me more time to catch up with you." Kitrini gave Dessandra a warm, affectionate hug. Dessandra ended the embrace. "Good to see you, Dessandra. What's this about a boy you kept from a crusade?" Everything was going smoothly until one of them matured. They began to metamorphosize into a demon that wasn't supposed to happen yet. But I found her a second time. She had grown even further. During the initial crusade, I found this boy, or more accurately, this boy found me. Anyways, I plan to learn more about this taint, using the boy to do so. They both found their gaze directed at the horizon. "I agree. My company has tried their best to staunch this taint as well, but in doing so, we lose the faith of the local establishments. Filthy heretics! I wonder if they even know a fraction of what would happen to them without us to shepherd them, Katrini spat out. Whether they know it or not, it stands as our duty to protect them. I know, but still, we could do so much more without having to fight our own people as we try to undo whatever in heaven's name is happening. They shared a sigh and looked at the horizon once more. The two exchanged old stories and new adventures, although Dissandra had now remembered how fond Katrini was of embellishing. Dissandra could see another convoy cresting the edge of the horizon, her brother Malik. Soon she could see the rest of the convoys emerge behind Malik, 8 in all, resplendent in their respective colors. Dissandra held the station of white, purity and direction. Katrini was blue for mind and sight. Malik held a rich purple, loyalty and power. All of them had a certain directive as represented by their color. Their convoy would share the color to help differentiate the factions. Not that that was necessarily a good thing. Many of her brothers and sisters' factions held grudges against one another, long-remembered disputes on the better chapter or more righteous, or even who had the more powerful archpriest or priestess. Luckily, Dissandra, and by extension her chapter, was viewed with favor from the others, or, well, most of the other chapters. It's been nice to catch up on old times, but I must make preparations for our brothers and sisters. I trust you'll see to your chapter and do me a favor. Don't start a fight between yours and anyone else's, all right? Dissandra said. That's a shame. I already planned a full night full of indignant mischief, all good-natured, mind you. But for you, sister, I'll see that I won't spark any conflicts while we are in your city. You have my utmost promise. Dissandra smiled as she left. She never could tell with Katrini. It was like whenever she said one thing, she actually meant another. Nevertheless, she trusted her, one of the few siblings that she fully trusted. Dissandra pushed the memories back into her unconscious mind and continued on her way to the monastery. Most of the preparation had already been executed, but there was one thing she needed to address. No matter how distasteful, the boy deserved to know. She entered her own monastery and climbed down the stairs leading to the basement, the dungeon, to be more accurate. Her feet stopped as she left the bottom of the stairwell. Her eyes met with the sight of a compartmentalized floor plan. The basement level of this monastery was different from the other monasteries. The bottommost level of the building was massive, covering a much larger distance than what you could see above ground. Due to the large amount of space, this level had taken many services. It was a storage room to hold supplies. She even knew that it held some medical resources as well. The floor also held dungeons. Dissandra walked between empty cells. They didn't have many prisoners. Most times it was a heretic that caused problems, and they didn't have to be taken alive. Quite the contrary, in fact. She found the cell she was looking for. Tall's cell. The boy looked at her with a mix of emotions, the most fervent one being morn-fueled anger. "How are you, Tall?" she asked, lips drawn in a tight line, and voice steady. "You lied. I thought you were different. You said that you'd keep me safe," the boy whispered. "I never said anything that I did not do, so I ask again. How are you, Tall?" "I should have trusted my sister, even if the demon wasn't my sister. I'm sure she's still better than you," he said quietly. Dissandra remained quiet. Why did those words cut so deep? She exhaled. "Tall, your village was overcome by what we call the taint. We received guidance that said this would happen, and thus me and my siblings were tasked with stopping it. To stop the spread, we went on crusades to eradicate it before it got any worse, only we don't know what it even is. So to stop it, we need more information. That's why I brought you here, Tall. Your body holds the secrets to this taint, and I plan on finding them," she explained. She remained silent. Wait, you're the one that burned down my village? Why? He said, his face clouded with emotion. It had to be done. I had no choice in the matter, Tull. You must know that, she said, her voice softer than normal as she finished. Tull turned away from her. She straightened her posture. Tomorrow morning we'll hold a court. Just a formality, really, but it has to be done, seeing as this is a unique situation. Me and my brothers and sisters will deliberate on what must be done. Then we will see what happens from there, she said. Tull didn't say anything. Right. You should expect dinner any minute now. Good night, Tull, she said, walking away. While Tull didn't say anything, Dysandra thought she could hear him cry as she climbed the stairs out of the dungeon. Dysandra returned to her room, sitting in a meditative pose. Suddenly, her soul shifted, and a memory flashed over her mind. Corneliu, you would do well to shut your mouth, Vecky hissed, her posture straight. But how can I? I mean, these jokes literally make themselves at this point, he said in an easygoing manner. Whose joke can be gestures, but you are not a gesture, 'cause gestures would actually be funny, Adage quipped. Hey, offsides. I saw you laughing at that last one. You're not fooling anyone, Corneliu shot back. Adage simply shrugged. That's enough, the both of you, Vecky spat. She took a deep breath in and then out. We are here. Does anyone know what this pool is referred to as? Anyone? Pool of glass. Named that because it's unusually clear and reflective water, Katrini answered. Very well, Katrini. Go on then, children. Look at the water. You'll see a perfect reflection of yourself. Andre was the first to the pool, followed by Dakiana. Dysandra stayed behind as her siblings rushed to see themselves in the water's reflection. What's your problem, daughter Dysandra? Not a fan of vastly important religious sites? Vecky asked. Well, I already know what I look like. What use is there in crowding the pool now that my siblings have all preoccupied themselves, not to mention the lack of space? Come, I will show you why. Come, children, she said in a quiet but intense tone. Her brothers and sister lined up beside her, all still as the older woman paced in front of them. Son Corneliu, why are you wet? Corneliu assumed a soldier's posture, chest puffed out and arms to the side. I was splashed, but not before I managed to fatally wound Sister Dakiana and Brother Andre. Vecky stopped mid-pace. Her eyes looked at Dakiana and Andre up and down. She wiped her face with her hands and then clasped them in front of her mouth. All of you, she said quietly with eyes that glared daggers at them. They remained still, unsure of what she had meant. Dysandra looked from Adage to Cynthia, both with a confused look on their faces. Vecky breathed out through her mouth. The pool! Get in! Dysandra looked backward and then walked herself to the edge of the pool. Malik and Catarix behind her. She looked over. The bottom was deep, and none of them were tall enough to stand in it. They would have to float. Dysandra stepped off the edge and dropped into the water. It didn't rush over her, it simply enveloped her as she swam herself back up. A gasp of air to announce her return to the previously calm surface of water. Her brothers and sisters followed her example. Corneliu and Adage jumped into the water, throwing droplets of water outward and upward, only to slightly drizzle them on their way back down. Good. For your personal information, this is an exercise, Vecky announced. Dysandra stilled, as did her siblings. Yes, an exercise, she paused. This one is to test and strengthen your self-control and how well you can control your breathing. In a fight, or any physical action for that matter, your power comes from your breath. How well you can control and learn how to use it, your goal is to remain still enough for the water to once again be undisturbed. But just by floating, we are creating ripples in the water. How are we to accomplish this goal? Katrini asked as she tilted her face up to keep water out of her mouth. That is what you must figure out, to control your breathing to the extent that there are no ripples in the water. Well, compared to the other exercises we've had before, this shouldn't be too hard. Might take a little time, but still, Cornelius supplied, a confident smile on his face as he looked at his siblings. Perhaps, Becky said. She kneeled by the pool and dipped her hand in the water. Dissandra shivered. The water was cold. It was getting colder. An empty feeling to the water as it became frigid, spreading to the others. I am altering this water to obey me. By pressing my astral energy into it and adding a sense of raw coldness, the water will align with how I want it to be. It will continue to get colder and colder and colder. Let's see how well you do, Becky announced, a silent vim in her voice. Dissandra's body began to shudder and shake. She had expected the water to get colder with time, but it hadn't. It was simply cold. So cold that her body began to hurt from the mere contrast to the warm air. The longer I see ripples, the longer we will continue this exercise, Becky said. Splashing sounded behind Dissandra. Cynthia was hyperventilating, her eyes wild as she looked for help. Dissandra looked back to Becky, meeting her eyes. I'm glad you all understand. Here's your saving grace. Your one saving grace. If 3 of you simply get out, this exercise will end. Simple as that. The coldness bit into Dissandra. Through the clear water, she could see her hands begin to turn purple. Dissandra turned her head to Cornelio. His whole entire body was shaking, muscles cramping, but his eyes, they still had light in them, determination, defiance. Dissandra swirled in the water, getting a look at the others. Some of them looked at Becky with hate, and some of them looked downward as they considered the deal. Angry ripples emanated from each of them, overlapping and growing as they tried to control their breathing and bodily movements. The cold increased, and Dissandra's diaphragm suddenly and rapidly expanded and deflated. Dissandra felt her control vanish as all her bodily functions started to misfire. The cold water did more than pain her numbed limbs. It spilled into her soul, crippling any resolve. She looked at Becky. The deal stands, Becky started. We only need 3. Only 3, and you all can enjoy some warmth. You all can leave all of this behind. It must be so hard, Becky started again. Controlling yourself and as your arms and legs wildly try to keep you stable, keep you afloat. All of you hyperventilating isn't helping. Just quit. That's all. Ah, good choice, Dakiana. Dissandra frantically turned her head to her right, fighting to make her body comply with her most simple and crude of movements. Dakiana swam to the edge with numb limbs, her hands and feet purple and curled in the coldness. She was hyperventilating. Water jumped into her mouth as her jerky movements caused rugged waves to reverberate in the pool. Dissandra kicked her legs, but without her dexterity they were almost useless. As she moved, she lost whatever heat she had retained. Cold water crashed over her, lighting up her nerves with terrible fire. She ground her teeth and swam in front of Dakiana, a desperate look that matched her own, wide eyes that pleaded for any chance at reprieve. If Dakiana really wanted out, there was little that Dissandra's numb limbs could do. Through the great, vast beyond, it took her a moment. The cold made her mind foggy and slow. Dissandra recognized her brother's voice. Through the great, vast beyond? What are you doing? Did I tell you to do this? Stop immediately, Becky screamed. Through the great, vast beyond, for I know Bonsmodis will respond. He which had the storms to be calmed, Cornelio recited in a voice clothed with bravado. Others began to join in. In his glory I will be born and embalmed. Becky glared at them, silent. The water became colder. You all think you're something. That right? The lot of you aren't any more than children without purpose. Without help, no one to care for you.